Hi, Rabbi. Sorry, I couldn't make the 10 o'clock one this morning.
Pardon me?
I couldn't make the rip from the headlines.
Right. I didn't think you were going to be able to make it today, at
Yeah,
noon.
I had so many things going on, and someone just came to the house at maintenance, so I couldn't make it.
Yeah, believe me. I understand. We're going to be thin today.
Oh,
Um, Carol has got guests. Ricky has a doctor's appointment.
oh,
She'll
okay.
take
Yeah,
it.
and I'm letting you know now, next week I have a dentist appointment, so I
Oh,
can't
okay.
can't go.
All right. So we are taking 1 week off for Pesach.
Okay, sounds good.
I just need that. How are you doing otherwise? How is
Otherwise,
everyone?
fine. Yeah,
Good,
good.
good. So the big news, I guess, is O.J. Simpson died.
No, I didn't. Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, just he had cancer, I guess.
Oh,
Yeah, tragic life.
oh, yeah. Horrible. But
Yeah. And here's Rabbi Zucker.
Boker Tov.
Boker Tov, how are you?
Good,
hi.
thank you.
Good.
We're a couple questions. Both of you can. Um, Almond milk, can that be kosher Pesach? Does that need special hechsher or what?
I'll look it up for you. Just
I was
give me.
about to say I don't have the
I have the app,
I
and
was about to say I don't have the RA list in front of me.
I have it.
Um,
Yeah,
Potentially it should be fine.
yeah. I would
It
think so.
depends what else they put in there besides almonds. And my thought would be you buy it before Pesach.
Yeah. Food list. Almond milk. Um, it says requires certification. That's all.
I don't know what's normally, and it's been a long time since I've
Yeah.
used almond
This
milk.
is from the CRC, Rabbi.
Okay, that's certainly
Yeah.
reliable. And OU also has a tendency, they just sent out a thing about please note that, what is the correct designations for kosher for Pesach, just because, that sometimes,
Oh,
you know,
hang on. That
yeah.
was wait. That was regular food, not Pesach food. One second. Let me just food items. Now, let me see what it says.
It
Almond.
has an OUD for the rest.
Almond, actually, almond milk is not listed. There's almond butter, almond flour. Let me see under milk. Maybe it's that way. One
Okay.
sec. Coconut milk, they have listed. Come on. Milk substitutes. Oh, here. Let me read it to you. Check the CRC Pesach guide for specific brands which are approved for Pesach. The OU has researched the following milk substitutes and determined that they are suitable for someone who is infirm and for infants when bearing the OU Lego. Blue Diamond Almond Breeze Original Unsweetened Almond Milk Parv Shelf Stable. Um, yeah, so it needs to have the OU logo and say,
But apparently it's okay. As long as it has the regular OU.
I think so. Yeah.
That would be my
There's another
income.
brand. Oh no, that's the coconut one. Um, it's
And you buy it beforehand.
yeah,
That's what I would do just to be
Yeah,
safe.
yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Right, right,
because also it's the type of thing that there are any number of things that could be in there.
right.
Um, and
For example, regular milk, it says must bear Passover certification. If certified is unavailable, non-certified milk purchased before Passover may be used.
Yeah. That's what we do, because it's.
Yeah. Mhm.
So,
Well, it also, I think depends what one's feeling um about kidneyot too.
right, right.
Some of the stuff might be
Well,
kidneyot.
It's, Elena uses, I don't, but Elena's, Mizrahi, so.
Oh, wait a
Yeah,
second.
well,
Those two, the Blue Diamond Almond Breeze and also Calafia Farms Go Coconuts Coconut Milk and West Life Plain Soy Milk they say it's really only for someone who is infirm.
yeah, but
Colwell She'ain Bo Sakana.
for someone who's I
Ill.
mean, I think that one of the motivations behind the tshuva permitting kitniot, its origin is with my teacher, Rabbi Galinkin in Israel, who, was dealing with the fact that there's much more mixing of not milk and meat, but Ashkenazim and Sfaradim. So, that was, and the Sephardic nature of Israel. So that just became a much more practical, especially since there's really no halachic basis for it.
Right.
And in the States, it's mostly led to confusion, but it does offer alternatives for people on restricted diets, like vegetarians and vegans. Then it becomes very, very important.
Right.
So that, especially people who are partaking of those things for those reasons, I feel much more comfortable, buy it before Pesach and it's fine. Again, the best thing is always looking if there's a hechsher, because I can't see anything, by the way, on the RA list.
Here's
This is from
here's one.
Aldi, and it has a normal extra. It just doesn't say anything about Pesach.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for example, here's one that says Lactaid milk. Okay, you've heard of that, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and it says acceptable without Passover certification if purchased before Passover.
Right,
Okay, there you
right,
go.
right. What, like normal milk.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Although for those of us with diabetes, speaking to this crowd,
Right.
the Fairlife
Right.
lactose-free milk, non-fat, has considerably less carbs.
Hmm.
It has only about 6 grams carbs, whereas the lactate has about 16.
Right.
So I happen to notice these things now. And okay, I don't know where everybody, well, I know where everybody else is. Maddie's working on the Kiddush. Charlotte and Ricky and Carol were not able to make it. Susie, it's hard
Right.
to know.
Maybe it's the subject.
That's true. What woman really likes to, it's like, hey, what are you going to tell me about that I don't already know? Let's see where, why can I, oh, there we go. Just want to. Okay, now it's a normal size. So basically, I thought we'd do something a little different today. I've been doing a lot of the more anthropological stuff. And that's fine. But we've talked about when it comes to Tumah v'Tahara, we've talked about Milgram and all this stuff about purity, ritual purity, quite a bit. So I thought I'd go back to just pure Jewish sources and look at how one midrash collection, in this case, one of our earlier ones, Vayikra Rabbah, there's a whole collection of midrashim known as Midrash Rabbah, literally the Great Midrash, even though, and it includes midrashim on all the books that we read liturgically. So it's on the 5 books of the Torah and on the Megillot. Now, even though it's Midrash Rabbah, it's a collection, it's literally a collection because these midrashim are from different authors and from different times. It's generally considered Bereshit Rabbah and Vayikra Rabbah are the earliest of them. And became very, very important works, and scholars have done critical editions. That is, they've put out an edition of the work with an apparatus that shows the different nuschaot, the different versions or texts that appear in different manuscripts, and with a little bit of commentary to very famous works. So, but Vayikra Rabbah is also very important in that, of course, it's dealing with Vayikra, which we've talked about is one of the central books, literally the central book of the Torah in the structure, but also one of the central books in terms of looking at how biblical religion is still a root for so much of Jewish practice. So even if the laws have changed quite a bit, if you want to understand Judaism, obviously, you'll have to look at the Vayikra and read its sections carefully. But at the same time, particularly when we come into the issues of Tumah v'Tohara, or even, frankly, dealing with the earlier sections with the different offerings, they became somewhat irrelevant in Jewish life in the sense that so many of these laws could not be practiced because we no longer had a Beit HaMikdash, and even, we give honor to the Kohanim and Leviim, sorry, Shel, but it's really an honor. It's not really required today because everyone is ritually impure, and the whole question of genealogy, et cetera, et cetera. So already very early on, our rabbis began to look at these texts, not just for the pshat meaning of the text, which certainly concerned them, but also not just for, if you will, the meaning of the text, but also the significance of the text. What does it mean religiously for Israel, even though there may be no Beit HaMikdash, even though these laws are not necessarily practical? Now, many of them continue to be. I mean, last week we read the laws of kashrut, and so much of our contemporary kashrut laws are based on those laws. And for that matter, issues of Tumah and Torah are not totally outside the realm of Jewish life. So it's not as if Vayikra is totally irrelevant, but still it leads the rabbis to interpret things a little bit differently. And there's actually a commentary on Vayikra Rabbah by a great rabbinic scholar, Max Kedushin, just really kind of in note form, called A Conceptual Commentary on Midrash Leviticus Rabbah, Value Concepts in Jewish Thought. He had done a magisterial work on the Mechilta, the early commentary on Exodus, but he also, did this one on Vayikra, which, I think, let's see, Avram Holtz, I think, was one of our professors at the seminary, worked on it. And I really have used this only rarely, and I just thought, wow, I haven't looked at this in a while. So I took some comments from there. One of the things that he points out is that whereas Vayikra is dealing with the religious life of the people in terms of the Mishkan and what happens there, and then obviously can be transmitted very easily to the world of the Beit HaMikdash. Now, suddenly, rather than dealing with the holiness of the sanctuary, that holiness for Kedushin is to some extent transferred onto the people. So for example, we're coming up to Pesach. One custom is for the person leading the Seder to wear a kittel, just like the Kohen Gadol or Kohen in the Beit HaMikdash. And the table is seen as the altar. The home is seen, of course, as a Mikdash Ma'at, a small sanctuary, and the table itself becomes like the altar, and many practices that were associated with the altar are connected to the meal. And in fact, I think it was Neusner who talked about the Pharisees as a table fellowship sect. That's 100% correct, but there's a great deal to it. We know that we wash before eating bread, just as the Kohanim washed before performing the rites in the temple. We add salt to our bread, just as they added salt to the sacrifices. So much of what goes on in Vayikra is now brought into the lives of everyday Jews. And also it's abstracted, that many of the concrete elements of the biblical text are now understood in a much more theoretical, not theoretical, but abstract idea. Like, how do we apply these religious ideas, or how do we draw on these religious ideas within our own thinking, within our own conceptual world, or at least, for the rabbis, their conceptual world. And that we see here in a midrash, the opening midrash on our parasha, which is a particular form of midrash, which Rabbi Zucker knows, that is known as a petichta, literally an opening. The darshan will begin with a verse that is seemingly very far removed from our parasha, generally a verse from Ketuvim. In the case of our midrash here, it's a verse from Tehillim, from the book of Psalms. And then the darshan is going to weave his way back down to the opening words of our parasha. It's a very common form of midrash, certainly in Vayikra Rabbah and Vayikra Rabbah, Bereshit Rabbah, and other places as well.
Basically, in baseball terms, they start over the left field fence. Go to right, get into right field, then over to third base, then over to first base, and finally home.
Yep, that's a good thing. Hi, Yehudi.
So
morning.
my son came in and unexpectedly, and we had to deal with some family business, but that's
Okay.
always nice.
All right, well, but it's always good to see your kids.
Baruch haba.
You better believe it, especially when
Yeah.
I pick up and I look at the text and he says he's Hazria.
Yeah, well, that's and that's what we're looking at today. We're actually, since I've done all the anthropological stuff and the yada yada yada, we're taking a look at the Jewish stuff, in this case Vayikra Rabbah, and just describing how the opening section of Vayikra Rabbah is a petichta, very common, and Rabbi Zucker just made a really very appropriate analogy. Do you want to repeat it?
Sure. They start over the left field fence and then finally throw the ball back into right field and then over to third base and then to first base, then to the pitcher's mound and finally to home.
Yeah. So the verse there, quoting is the second verse of our parasha. Isha ki tazria, a woman when she produces seed, and if it's a male, she's impure for 7 days. Yeah. So anyway, they're taking this line, Isha ki tazria, a woman when she produces seed or when she gives birth. And then it begins, Harahu tichtiv, as it is written, Achor v'kedem tsartani. After and before you formed me, and you placed your hand upon me, is the rest of the verse, which, doesn't necessarily connect to our parasha, because literally, Achor v'kedem tsartani, it's generally translated today as from behind and in front, you have hedged me in. But the darshan is playing on this word tsartani, connecting it, looking at the note here, literally you hedged me in. The darshan is playing on the similarity, it should be to the word yatsar, to form. Oh, we're taught if this is to form, well, and that has to deal with birth, the creation of the human being. So now let's connect this. Let's see how this verse is somehow connected to the opening verse of our parasha. Do you want to go on, Shel?
Sure.
Rabbi Yochanan?
Rabbi Yochanan said, if a person merits, he inherits two worlds, this one and the next. That is what is written, after and before you formed me. If not, he comes to present an account taken as it is stated, you placed your hand upon me, as it is written, remove your hand from me, and let me your terror frighten
Not your terror frightened.
not your terror frighten me.
Okay, let's figure out what is Rabbi Yochanan saying. He's obviously commenting on this verse from Psalms. And how is he understanding this? Not necessarily the clearest. But Achor v'kedem tzartani, after and before you formed me. And he's saying that that's actually referring to,
Well, it says, I think it's meaning like if a person merits, does well, has done, exceptionally, he is guaranteed in this life and the next one.
okay,
Well,
That's-
the after would be a reference to the afterworld.
very
Yeah.
likely. Yep.
Right.
Mhm. So,
Isn't it also possible that Zacha doesn't necessarily mean merits in the sense that he earned it, but rather merits in the sense that Hashem gives him favor, like Hashem panav elecha v'yichuneka. I'll give you a midrashic example of how the word is used exactly that way. How does David get to the throne? Basically, without killing anybody. He gets to the throne because all the other possible people who could inherit somehow get killed. Okay, so the Midrash says about that Zachar. Okay, how does it go? Malachtona Asayadachirim. That's the term. Zachar Malachtona Asayadachirim. Now you could say that what that means is that, and it's very interesting because another version of the same Midrash says Tzadik Nasa Malachtona Asayadachirim. So it's clear that the first Midrash doesn't agree with the second one. Now, you can't go around saying David is the tzaddik because, after all, he was willing to shed Naval's blood. So it's not like if he's a person who was not ready to commit a crime, if he feels that he wants to commit one, he's basically running a gang out there, But Zachat means if Hashem smiles on you, okay? That's not quite the same. I mean, we're going to assume that Hashem tends to smile on people who merit that. But we also have to realize that you can't say Yisa Hashem, excuse me, Hashem, that could be if you merit it. But when the Ben says Yisa Hashem, that clearly means if you don't merit it, because that's the whole point of Yisa Hashem, Yisa Panim, below Yikach Shokat. In other words, Bedalo said in other words, what we're asking for is special things.
Yeah.
So what Rabbi Yochanan is saying is there are some people in this world who manage to get that kind of special favor, for whatever the reason is, okay? But most people don't, and so they have to basically account for their deeds. And since most of us can't assume we're going to basically be a zochet to special favor, what does that one be?
Yeah, well, and that's what he gets to in the next one. The rest of the statement, it's possible Zacha. I still think Meris is a totally fair translation here, but it is important to recognize that every midrash, they're different darshanim, they're different rabbis, and different schools, and they don't always use words in the precise manner. Generally, yes, and I Kedushin would, talk about that. But, I think that, anyway, because he goes on, keep going. So, yeah, yes, that, if you merit or if, God approves, you'll inherit two worlds,
Right.
this world and the next. However, if not, Bali Din v'chashbon. he comes to present an account taking. I think it's not entirely clear. Is it God who comes to present an account taking, or is it the person? Certainly in other places, and on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we think if the person comes, a person does an account taking and has to present it before God. And here they quote the rest of the verse, because they want to connect the two parts of the verse. Achor v'kedem sartani. But then v'tashat alai kapecha, you placed your hand upon me. And that could be just simply that you created me and you placed your hand upon me. That's an act of creation, formation, whatever. But he's implying that remove your hand from me and let not your terror frighten me. Certainly in the book of Job, that seems to imply some type of punishment when God places his hand. And that's Kedushin points that out. Sorry, not Kedushin. This is from the Margoliot, the Hebrew edition of Vayikra Rabbah. Understanding your hand is implying punishment and chastisement. So,
well, this text that he's giving support, but they're easy to explain according to the Pshat. When the fellow in Psalms is praising God's creation, he's the praise he gives is more for the inner creation than the external one, like Baruch Nafshi does.
right.
He's more praising God's creation of humanity. But when he says it means and saw to it that I was put together the way I should be put together. Now, normally though, Yad Hashem does not mean that kind of thing. When you talk about Yad Hashem in the Tanakh, it doesn't mean the Yad that basically sees to it that things are complete. It means the Yad that inflicts punishment. So when Eov says he's a lot closer to the real pshat of that phrase than the guy in Psalm 139 is. Rabbi Yochanan is doing a great job of bringing in Pesukim Rechokim and bringing it next to the Pasuk Karov and coming, for Rabbi Yochanan is the outstanding I've got us of all time. So, I'm not surprised that he does it. But on the other hand, don't you feel there's something a bit unconvincing about this?
Well, I would. What do you mean? Because on
The
one
way
hand,
he's, the
when I
way
read
he's
the
doing
biblical
it. In other words,
verse,
on what basis is he actually coming up with this? In other words, I read Achar v'kedem tartani. I don't get the feeling that it means to mean anything other than Hashem sees to it that both the front part and the back part are properly fashioned, so that a human being that comes out isn't what we would label a freak. Okay, that's a pshat. Now, if you want to go ahead and say to alamot zutta hey, but the connection he makes with Hatasha, where I would look for an explanation of this to the American set, because he tries to deal not with pure sa'ot, but with actual explanations. I'm going to take a look at it right now.
what?
You go ahead. The American set.
Oh,
the
yeah,
standard,
I don't have American.
But I
don't
do,
have
and I'm
American.
going to get,
Okay. But again, I think that important to recognize that we're dealing with midrash. And a midrash that appears in other places, but the notion of there being olam haba olam hazeh, olam haba, and judgment, that's it becomes standard rabbinic thinking. And of course, Rabbi Yochanan, I think so many of the darshanim are putting rabbinic thinking onto the Bible. It's not necessarily in the Tanakh, but they're trying to read the Tanakh through their particular lens, or lenses, I should say.
The trouble is that in this case, I can't even figure out what their lens is. That's the problem. If I knew what it was, I would say Gesundheit, hey, but I just don't get it.
Well,
In other words, what is he trying to tell us?
Well, I think that there are certain ideas that are just there. The rabbis take them, for granted. Whether it's Torah equals Mayim or Chochmah equals Torah. They're just certain things that's part of their conceptual framework, and they read it back onto the biblical text. I think, we know there are many people that read the Bible and say this is what it means. Well, that's how the rabbis understood it. It's not necessarily what the pshat of the text is Many other Mefarshim will say, yeah, Rashi says this, but, and contemporary scholars. Now,
American isn't too much help here. The next thing you have to do is go to your Faith Torah. I mean, the unabridged edition of your Faith Torah. You know, because you're right. This definitely needs work. Okay, I just didn't know what. I mean, I'm just woke up. My son's still in the house. He's about to sleep. Grandma's talking to him right now. But
okay.
what I'm saying is that you know, this type of a thing definitely stimulates you to look more.
Yeah. Well, I think
If I
that, you know,
figure out
just,
anything, I'll send it to you.
yeah. And by the way, you know, one of the things that we have to remember, of course, our Midrash collections are collections. They bring all kinds of sources in. And here we have this verse that's talking about the formation of a human being, as it were, Ishaki Tazria. And so now they're going to go in this whole riff about the human being. He yeah, what's the verse again? Ishaki Tazria v'yalda zachar. You know, they're not interested in the physical details or the even the pshat of the text, but what is this saying about the human being? What does it mean to create a human being? So go on, Shell.
Rabbi Shmuel Bar, is that Nachman or Naaman?
Nachman.
Nachman said, when the Blessed Holy One created Adam, the first man, he created him
Androgynous in the Hebrew.
Yeah.
In other words, that's kind of an interesting statement. Neither male nor female.
Right, right.
So that's you know, and of course the biblical text does struggle with that. You know, it says in the first chapter, God creates the human being in God's image after God's likeness. Zacharu nekeva bara otam. Created a male and female. And then, you know, and you go into the second story of creation, then you have Adam being created, and then Chava being created from Adam's side. But it's an interesting statement that the human being was, or the first, and again, we're talking about the primordial man here. You know, I would not say that this is, you know, every human being is created this way, but so I'm really, yeah. Shabarakadosh Baruch Hu, Adam Harishon. They're trying to, as Adam, the first man. We would probably just say primordial man.
For the first human.
Yeah, the first human,
Right.
right? But that's
Well,
precisely.
they do consider
precisely.
Adam Harishon primordial man.
Pardon me?
That's why they call it for the very fact that Chazal would never recognize a name like Adam. Shows that they say Adam Harishon means primordial man.
Right. But the first, and specifically the first human. There is no gender to this first human.
Absolutely.
And that's a fascinating idea. That gender comes later, as it were. It's you know, I'll be honest. I have not read any of the halachic work on the contemporary halachic work on people born without sexual organs or two sexual, you know, or combined, or you know, gender reassignment surgery, you know, all of that stuff. That's above my pay grade as far as I'm concerned. But seriously, I have not looked at any of the halachic work on it, and I don't know if they use any of these midrashim. But it does right now. But let's go on. So we, you know, one notion of the human being is that the human being is presented with opportunities, if you will, or possible paths. One, you know, in this world that could lead to olam haba, and one that will not, will lead to punishment. Now we have another thing about the human being as being ungendered, human being. And really, and to some extent that, well, so let's go on to the next one.
Reish Lakish said, when he was created with two faces. God sawed him, and two backs were formed. a back for the male and a back for the female.
Also interesting, very much like the Janus faced.
Right.
And I think this, I don't remember I think I've got Hesiod's Theogony over here. I don't remember all of my Greek and Roman mythology, but I think this was not an uncommon idea. But here, of course, looking at the first story of creation, this makes sense. Yeah, you can say he wasn't gendered, the first human being. On the other hand, Zachar Nekeva bara otam. How do we get two? If he creates one, how does he get two? And an interesting surgery that Reish Lakish considers here. And now, of course, that's not just, people can't just sit with that, because we don't just have the first chapter of Genesis, we also have the second chapter. Go on.
They raised an objection to him. He took one of his ribs.
Mitzalotav. He took one of his
Mitzalotav.
Mitzalotav. He took
He
one of his
said-
ribs. What do you mean? Made a back for this and a back for that and sawed him in half. It says he took it from the ribs. Go on.
Actually, a word doesn't mean ribs.
Right. But
He said to them, it was one of his sides, as it is written, for the second side, Utsala, of the Mishkan.
L'tzela HaMishkan. Yeah. Yeah. So that's, as Yehudi said, it doesn't necessarily mean rib. We understand it, that Eve was created from Adam's rib. That's not really what the text says. But what do both of these things kind of imply in terms of creation of male and female?
They're basically one and the same, and they're equal. And the only separation that there is between them is below the belt.
Yep.
And l'chakila, that wasn't the case.
Right.
It had to be done in the end in order to basically make reproduction possible.
Mm-hmm. And indeed, Kedushin says,
When you say Kedushin, you mean Max Kedushin?
Max Kedushin, yeah.
At first I thought you were talking about Seklus Kedushin. I was driving myself crazy to figure out what you were talking about.
No,
I got it.
I realized I started looking at this at a book that I have not picked up in a long time, and only used fitfully before then, is a conceptual commentary in Midrash Vayikra Rabbah, Value Concepts in Jewish Thought by Max Kedushin.
Yeah, I have that. That's a good idea. That's a good idea.
So it's very, clearly they're probably drawing from manuscripts and, they're just scattered comments, but certainly worth exploring. And he mentioned these midrashic statements, woman is made co-equal with man, reflecting the equality in Genesis 1. So there is, again, now that we have a statement about the paths that a human being may choose, and we also have some statements here regarding the nature of male and female. There's a
but there's also a statement as to the nature of free will. People can choose what they want to do in terms of free will, to do a good path or a bad path, etc., and have that, and with certain outcomes. But they definitely cannot choose what sex they want to be. In other words, once God has basically decided that, there's no way that Judaism would basically go ahead and say, okay, now that's up to you. You decide what you want to decide. That's something that basically, in other words, that this would be, I know in Western world today, the next group decides it wants to do something upside down, the whole world has to go with it. But in Judaism, the attitude would be, but law.com made so no. That's the basic attitude. Like, why don't you make vegetarians eat meat during 9 days? Because you don't really care what the vegetarians do. They're just a small group. Let them do what they want, but we're not going to turn around the halacha because of the fact that there's a group of people to whom it doesn't apply.
Well, I mean, I think it's also fair to say that in rabbinic times and medieval times, and up until fairly recently in human history, the idea of, gender reassignment surgery was certainly not even a possibility. But let's just, but again, all of these things, they're, from this one verse, Isha ki tezria v'yalda zachar, what is a human being? Both in terms of, and I think you're right, in terms of theologically, the human being has free will. The human being can choose a path that she or he will follow, and she and he are essentially equal. So now we go on to some other concepts of how a human being is, or what the primordial man, how that initial human was created. Go ahead, Shel.
Yeah, Rabbi Berechia, Rabbi Helbo, and Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman said, when the Blessed Holy One created the first man, he created him such that he filled the entire world from one end to the other.
That's kind of an interesting notion. What do you think might be behind that? I'm not sure, frankly. I don't.
Oh, I'll tell you what I think is behind that. The human potential. Basically, every human being has the potential to do something or create something which is going to affect the world from one end to the other, which is something no animal can possibly claim. Okay? That's what's special about humanity. That is, and the human brain can come up with things that will affect the entire world. Let's take like the smartphone. Who doesn't have one? Okay? So that's, I think, what it means. The potential of the human being is to go from one end of the world to the other.
Yeah, I think that's a good reading, especially, when there is the notion that one person is created because, the entire world does indeed come from one person. So that is, I think, a very good reading. Any others? But it is, kind of, it's not a science fiction film. It's, but there's also the notion of, the human being as the microcosm of the universe, that all is contained within the human being. The human, that gets much more into much later Judaism and the Kabbalah, and that's not what's here.
I mean, you could also say that when he created man, he put man all over the world. Literally, it could mean this. They put it all over the world, as opposed to potential. What Yehudi was saying. I don't know. It depends how you interpret.
Yeah,
this.
I mean, I think it is open to these different ways of reading. But one of the things that's so powerful about Midrash is that, or I think, is that like a lot of great art, it's open to interpretation.
Yeah.
Some things are clear, and I think there are some readings that are better than the other, better than another, not necessarily in this case, but the fact that we have a number of comments. When God created the first human being, there are a number of ways of interpreting it, and they all raise different issues.
Right.
And of course, you have to have some source for your statement, which is the next part.
Okay, I'll continue. From
Yeah.
word is derived that he filled the world from east to west, as it is stated, after and before you formed me.
Yeah, because kedem is often used for the east.
From where
Far for the west.
Yeah, or to the west. So, because if you're facing east,
The default facing direction in Tanakh is facing east.
right.
In Egyptian, ancient Egypt, it was facing south, the source of the sun and the source of the Nile.
Mm-hmm.
But on Eretz Yisrael, everybody who lived in the ancient Near East and what we would call the non-Egyptian part looked upon east as where the sun
Mm-hmm.
rises as the default direction.
So that's what, so how did we know from,
That's why Kedem means east.
right.
Achor, like Yom HaAcharon, is another way of saying the Mediterranean
Right.
Sea.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Small means north, assuming you're facing east.
East.
Your left arm is north.
North,
Okay.
mhm.
Yamin means south. And all these words are used in Tanakh in a directional sense.
Yep.
I can tell you right off the bat the verses if you want to look them up.
No,
Small
I
mean
know.
north. Okay. You know.
Yeah, I think no. I mean, and if you read Tanakh, that's pretty obvious. And we just read descriptions of the Mishkan, so we know from directions. Okay, go on.
From where it is derived from north to south, as it is stated, from one end of the heavens to the other end, and from where it is derived the entire space of the world, as it is stated, you placed your hand upon me.
Yeah. Again, they're somewhat more obscure. We wouldn't necessarily say these are the greatest proof texts, but certainly from one end of the heavens to the other. I mean, that's that kind of works. And you placed your hand upon me. How could that be throughout the world? Why is that an indication that it covered the world or the space of the world? That's what it says here, right? Yeah. Cool. Oh, but
I mean, because
yeah.
because
Uminayin kechalalo shel olam.
it's God is you placed your hand. God,
Right.
God, it's God's hand.
Yeah, and God is everywhere, so it
Yeah,
makes sense
right,
that
exactly.
yeah. Okay, so again, and again, yeah, there are different ways of reading this, but there's still the sense that the human being or the influence of the human being stretches all over the place. Maybe that's again the potential of the human being. It's there's another midrash which I don't really think is implied here, but says wherever you see the footsteps of man, and you will see my footsteps. That the human being, to some extent, is an extension of God, if you will. I mean, we are the representation of God in the world. So again, it could be talking about human potential. And again, all this, Isha ki tasrivi al zachar. We're talking about the birth of a human being. What is a human being? Not just in a physical sense, but in a theological sense, in a moral sense, even a political sense. Okay, now we go on.
Remember with that statement, I'd like to put in a qualifier. We are the representations of God to some extent because we're called Tselem Elohim.
Right.
But at the same time, when we start worshiping ourselves, and we've carried the resemblance too far.
Yeah, absolutely. There is absolutely no question. That's why we're not allowed to create any image. God can create an image. God creates a divine image in the human being, but we're not allowed to create any image of anything that exists. Now, we've talked about this before. You've mentioned how if you look at the images, even on the Mishkan, they're combined critters. They're human and animal, or different kinds of animals, or as Woody Allen once joked about a mythical beast, which had the head of a lion and the body of a lion, but not the same lion. Okay, go on.
Rabbi Elazar said, after this is the first day and before this is the final day.
This is talking about creation.
According to the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, this is as it is written. God said, let the earth produce living creatures in its kind. This is the spirit of Adam, the first man.
Okay. So here, but now we're going to get more into what does it mean to be created before and after?
Reish Lakish said, after is the final day, and before this is the first day. According to Reish Lakish, it is as it is written, the Spirit of God hovered over the surface of the water.
Yeah, when does that happen?
In the creation of the world.
Yeah, at the very beginning of creation.
Yeah. This is the spirit of the Messianic King. If a person...
there is, before we go any further, there is a midrash, there is a notion I should say, because it's not just in Midrash, it's in Pirkei Avot, that among the things that are created before creation are the Mashiach. So, here when we're talking about before, it's to some extent even before creation. Because indeed, the Spirit of God hovering over the water, it's really before God begins the process of creation. The world is unformed and void, and the Spirit, or a wind from God, is over the surface of the water. So it's before creation actually begins. Go on.
I'll just repeat that. This is the spirit of the Messianic King. If a person merits, they say to him, you preceded the entire act of creation. If not, they say to him, the gnat preceded you, the worm preceded you. Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Tachum said, after all the creations, before all the punishments.
So on one hand, the human being is created before everything. And that implies a certain degree of superiority, I would say. But then, at the same time, they're talking about, the human being. Oh, you're wonderful. You preceded all the acts of creation. On the other hand, you were actually formed after the gnat and the worm. So don't get cocky. It's really a very powerful. You going to say something, Rabbi Zucker?
You're an afterthought.
Yeah.
Yo,
very good.
Rabbi Zucker. By the way, here too, Rabbi Papi, here too, Lord Zachar clearly does not have to do with it's really a question of merit isn't really what it means here. It really means either there's the possibility of saying to a human being at the end of his life, when you see what he's accomplished or what she's accomplished, then you can sum it up and say, you've really changed the world, and in which case you came first. And then you can say, you were there the whole time and didn't do a thing of you twisted more than you. In other words, that's indeed why we put humanity as the last thing that was created. In plain Pashut Pshat, that's what it means. And another point, Ruach Elohim, even according to the Pshat, that doesn't have to mean the Spirit of God.
Right.
That could mean something like Ruach Gadol Ma'od. It's perfect. Plenty of times that's the way to use it. In fact, it's very hard to understand it if you say the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Okay? It doesn't really make too much sense. But for the Midrash, it's fine. But for the Pshat, you have to ask what in heaven's name are we talking about? That's
well,
part
that's
of the chaos. No, well, that's part of the chaos. The winds were blowing, huge winds were blowing in every which direction, and nobody knew which way they were going. And that's why God has to bring order out of chaos.
And of course, the contemporary scholars and contemporary translations do not necessarily translate this as the Spirit of God. It could be a wind from God. By the way, I forgot to put this in, but Kedushin writes, well, actually, we have to go on to this next section, and then we'll get there.
Even his praise came only last, as it is stated, beasts and all animals, creeping animals, and birds of wing, and thereafter kings of the earth and all nations.
Beautiful psalm, and it's like, yeah, we're going to praise all the creations, but let's name all the animals before we name the human beings, even the human beings that seemingly deserve all the kavod because they're kings and leaders.
Rabbi Simlay said, just as the creation of man was after animal, beast, and bird, so his law is written after those of the animal, beast, and bird. That is what is written. This is the instruction regarding animals, birds, and all living beings.
That's the end of last week's parasha.
And thereafter, a woman when she produces seed.
Yeah, so now finally we've gotten to the end of the drasha and the first verse or one of the first verses of the parasha that we had, and to some extent its Smichut Parshiot and explaining why the Torah is in the order it's in. Why do we have all the rules about the animals, which are the rules of offerings and sacrifices, and only then do we get to rules regarding human beings. And in that journey, the Midrash has taken us into all kinds of reflections on the human being. And what is the human being? What does he represent? What is his potential? What does he mean morally, ethically, etc.? So, I mean, just a fascinating little piece of how the rabbis are taking the biblical text, which in many ways is not, well, I mean, we still deal with childbirth, we still deal with menstruation, so there certainly are practical consequences to some of the rules of Tumah v'Tahara, but there are many that really no longer are practiced. Certainly the offerings are not offered. So there's so much of Vayikra that seemingly is outdated. And yet the rabbis are saying, no, 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 no. You know, when we think about this, there are a lot of things that we could learn. And I think this is a wonderful, wonderful little piece. And also I should add, I forgot to put it in, this one comment from Kedushin. Well, I did put it in at the bottom here. You preceded the entirety, sorry, I can't read this word. You preceded the entire act of creation. What Kedushin says here, do you want to, the emphasis is on the interpretation of Kedem, for this is a new and entirely rabbinic idea. What precedes in creation is regarded as having a higher status. The creation of cattle and other animals means that man's status is higher. In other words, because man was created, at least in theory, before the creatures. The Bible itself does not have this criterion for status, and the higher status of man is stated in a direct and explicit manner in Genesis 1:26. But it is a notion that comes, and we see it in many ways, as the rabbis try and connect a lot of things to before creation, what preceded creation. You know, sometimes they're dealing with, like, how do we explain this in the world? And other times they're trying to emphasize the status. And even to some extent, you have that a little bit. I don't think it's exactly the same thing, but a little bit in Christian theology. You know, you connect Jesus. First of all, we just have Jesus appearing in Gospel of Mark. And then in the Gospel of Matthew, always connected back to David. That's much more Jewish of the Gospels. Then he's got to be connected back to the individual man, the first man, primordial man, in the Gospel of Luke. And then in the Gospel of John, Jesus is before all creation. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And of course, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. You know, that's the Gospel of John, that Jesus preceded creation. And, you know, of course, they're drawing it very likely from Jewish notions. You know, we had that, this is the spirit of the Messianic King comes before creation. So you have this pops up again and again in rabbinic literature and other literature of the period. So that's our study for today. A look at one fascinating element of Vayikra Rabbah.
Right.
Any comments?
Thank you.
Further?
Good.
Thank you.
Okay. Everybody be well.
Yep.
And Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Take care.
Bye. Whoops.
Ta-da.